Good morning, good afternoon. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Jahara Said, the program manager at Open Data Watch. And on behalf of the organizing team, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the first day of our two-day event on achieving better outcomes with better gender data. We have a packed agenda for you over the next 2 days and are excited to engage with you on important topics related to using alternative gender data sources, strengthening communication practices, and encouraging data use. But before we begin, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items. Firstly, the event is being simultaneously translated to French. So please select the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen so you can adjust your language. And then secondly, while we'll have dedicated time for Q&A during our panels, please also feel free to continue to engage with our speakers and team throughout the event using the chat function on Zoom. So now to officially get us started, I'd like to welcome William Muhava from the Africa Center for Statistics at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and Ms. Sheda Badi, the Managing Director of Open Data Watch, to give their opening remarks. Over to you, William.
Thank you, Ja. I'm William Muhava. I'm the Chief for Demographic and Social Statistics, and I'm standing in for the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, Ms. Vera Sonkwe, and also the Director of African Center for Statistics, Mr. Oliver Chinganya, who couldn't join us because they are actually on other engagements. So on their behalf, I would want to convey my heartfelt welcome to all of you, those participating on this webinar. I'm very pleased to be here today to open this webinar, Achieving Better Health, Better Outcomes with Better Gender Data, which will run for 2 days. As you will appreciate, gender issues are a top priority for ECA. And as you know, our executive secretary, she's actually a very dedicated person in terms of gender issues. And she actually makes sure that we adhere to that at the Economic Commission for Africa. Gender equality is essential for sustainable economic growth and development. And this is even more so in this time of this global COVID-19 pandemic. The Gender Data Network, the GDN, is an initiative launched in March 2019 by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and Data2x in partnership with the Open Data Watch to raise the profile of gender data within African national statistical systems. It brings together gender data focal points as representatives from 19 national statistical offices responsible for producing gender statistics. The network supports their work by facilitating cross-country learning, enabling capacity building, conducting trainings, and providing a platform for them to exchange information. This initiative has supported the production and use of quality gender data, as well as efficient use of this data for policy decision making in the project countries. Since the inception of the project, the commitment and determination of the focal persons and other members of the GDN project has allowed us to achieve unprecedented results. Firstly, we have provided the training of trainers for the 15 countries on production of gender statistics using different data sources and how to communicate these data to show gender issues for policymakers and public users. We have also trained on data visualization. Various webinars have been held on gender and related thematic topics, regularly updating different learning videos, training materials, publications, which would help to contribute on the jobs of these focal persons. We are proud as ECA of their achievements and would like to extend our sincere congratulations to all the members. This is also an opportunity for us to express our gratitude to Data2x and Open Data Watch for initiating the GDN and supporting its implementation. The GDN is truly a team effort among our development partner organization. As I've said before, the Gender Data Network project helps member states through providing different capacity building trainings, share platforms for exchange of information, conducting webinars on gender and other thematic topics through creating close collaboration among these member states. We are pleased to see that success of the Africa Gender Network, Data Network project has created interest among other regions to be part of the project. And we are also pleased to welcome Paris 21 to join us to support the GDN and its expansion to regions other than Africa. We very much value the GDN and will remain fully active in supporting the GDN and its expansion, pulling resources together with Data2x, Paris 21, and Open Data Watch to support the members. Ladies and gentlemen, going forward, we aim to support the enhancement of gender data practices in Africa and build and share knowledge and commit to programs to share experiences, build synergies between various stakeholders at national, regional, and global levels. We hope such expansion of the Gender Data Network family will allow us to intensify our joint efforts towards closing the gender gap in statistics and pave the way for more gender responsive national statistical systems in Africa and the other regions. The meeting that brings us together today aims to achieve this objective and will help participants to enhance their skills and share knowledge in various areas of gender statistics. To this end, it gives us opportunity to cover any array of timely and relevant topics such as alternative data sources to close gender data gaps. 2, data use to promote impact of gender data. 3, latest best practices in communicating gender statistics. As you all know, although many national statistical offices have attempted to establish and succeeded in establishing sound gender statistics program, persistent gender data gaps still remain. The main solution of this challenge is integrating alternative gender data sources to fill gender data gaps and improve coverage of gender data by taking advantage of different data sources, including surveys, censuses, administrative data, citizen-generated data, and big data. I think you all know that the big thing now is the big data, and at the ECA, one of our transformational agenda is the use of big data. These statistics obtained from different alternative data sources will help to understand well the situation between men and women in different contexts, to create sustainable development policies, and then to monitor progress towards gender equality. Likewise, communicating gender statistics is an important step in advocating for evidence-based policy for gender equality, as well as raising awareness of the need for more and better gender data. Strategies for communicating gender statistics to deliver impactful messages are becoming crucial for national statistical offices and data producers. It is therefore evident that a different set of interventions needs to be considered for women, and that high quality, timely gender data are needed to inform policies. Distinguished speakers and participants, I have high hopes that this webinar will contribute in sharing the work that development partners are doing to close the gender data gap and demonstrate how partnerships and advocacy can push the gender data agenda and be a powerful catalyst in addressing gender data challenges. In conclusion, let me assure you that ECA is committed to continue working with development partners to support our member states in mainstreaming gender statistics into national statistical systems. And we have a number of programs on that. I think we now have the Africa Development Bank project and other projects which we are aiming to intervene in certain countries. So I'll be looking forward to the outcomes of the discussions, which I will share with my principals, the ES and the director. So let me thank you for this kind attention and wish you a successful meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. Over to you, Sheda.
Thank you. Thanks, William, for those really comprehensive and very useful opening remarks. I wanted to pass my greetings and warm welcome to our audience. It's really great to see so many of you on this webinar today. If you're attending this event or listening to its recording at later time, I'm sure you are most likely someone who appreciates the importance of gender data and the importance of it for gender equality, for leaving no one behind, for well-being of women and girls, and of course for sustainable development and much more. But you also probably appreciate that we have many gender data gaps, and working with our partners, Paris 21, Data2x, and UN Economic Commission Center for Statistics, we have done a lot of work on understanding where these gaps are. And as you know, these gaps are in all sectors, from health to education to environment, which is one of the most, which is one of the sectors with most gaps in sex segregated data and gender-related data. So we are also looking behind these gaps to understand what are the causes of these gaps. And this is an important conversation for us to have, as where these gaps are and what are the causes of these gaps. But also move on to the conversation about the solution. But I wanted to make sure that it's really important for all of us to keep in mind that while we keep the conversation on the solution, we should also keep looking for what are the causes of these gaps and what are the problems that we are really trying to address from the policy needs and from the user's perspective needs. I always say the famous saying that a problem well stated is half solved. So looking for these gaps will actually guide us for finding the best solutions for resolving it. But the focus of today and the focus of this work that we are sharing with you is really on solutions. What are some of the recent solutions that we think are usable and can be scaled to other countries. And as William said very well, these are the three topics of today's focus. One is really on the importance of using alternative data sources, moving from just traditional sources to alternative sources for filling these gaps. The second one is, of course, the importance of communicating gender data. And communicating gender data is tremendously important, not only for making advocacy, but also for really closing the gap between availability of data and use of data and use in policy. And finally, very important new topic that we want to share with you, which is really understanding more of what is behind data use. How can we motivate more data use? How can we make better use of existing data? How can we remove the barriers that we have, whether it's technical or otherwise, for improving data use? So those are three main topics that we are super excited to share with you in the next hour ahead of us, and also tomorrow. But one of the most important solutions that we've been working on, as also William mentioned, since 2019, is to form the Gender Data Network. And really there we have to thank Data2x for bringing us allowing us to do that initiative and bringing us the resources and the support for it. And of course, UN Economic Commission for Africa, and now Paris 21 has joined us, and it's really wonderful to see that all these agencies are coming together to support the GDN and bring the focal points for gender data from different countries together and sharing the experiences and solutions among them. So we're really excited also for the expansion of the GDN. And I just wanted to plant that idea for you, that if you know of a country, or if you are a focal point in a country that you would like to join GDN, please contact us. We will be soon coming out with more communication about the expansion of the GDN, and you will hear about it. So we are a few minutes over time, Jay, so I'll pass it on to you. I'm really super excited with the program that we have put together, and really thank everybody for being here and choosing this hour to be with us. And I hope it would be fruitful, and I hope you will stay engaged and involved and support us in this really important initiative of promoting gender data and finding solutions for closing gender data gaps. Thank you very much on behalf of all of us organizing this webinar. Over to you, dear Jay.
Thank you so much. Thank you to you, Shayla and William. I can't think of better remarks to kick us off for today. To keep us going, I'd like to now welcome our next speakers. So we have Jessica Espy, a gender data expert and consultant, and Miriam Ait Uyahia, the Gender Data Network Coordinator at Paris 21. And they'll be providing some context around the state of gender data and introduce the GDN. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Jay. Thank you to everyone for your wonderful remarks thus far, and to the organisers of this great event. It's a real pleasure to be with you all. As already mentioned, my name's Jessica Espy. I'm a senior advisor to the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, as well as Open Data Watch, and I'm supporting the Gender Data Network with a bit of work at the moment. So just a few remarks from me about the kind of current state of gender data in Africa. For many of you on the line, this will be very, very familiar territory, and you will know many of these facts and figures far better than any of us in your individual contexts. But just a broad overview, as you may be aware, in 2019, Open Data Watch, Shayda and her team with Data2x did some wonderful research looking at the state of gender data across Africa, and really trying to sort of take stock of where things currently stand. And that work is still incredibly relevant and valid today. And a few key findings from that I thought I would just kick off with to paint a picture is that they looked at 104 gender relevant indicators that cover the SDG areas, as well as supplemental indicators proposed by UN Women and national governments. and found that only half of those, only 52% of gender relevant indicators were available in the 15 countries that they were studying in Africa, the 15 countries that are in the Gender Data Network. So overall, we're seeing that only half of the data that we really need to be monitoring different aspects of gender equality are available. And actually probably way more than that, because they were really just looking at sex disaggregated data. And of course, gender is a more complex phenomenon. So really, we are woefully behind on many of the most important elements of gender that we need to be monitoring and understanding to improve policy and outcomes. And further than just having this paucity of data, there are some big underlying challenges. One of which is that, of course, many of the data sets that we really need are dependent on administrative data, and that administrative data is not available because there isn't the institutional capacity or resourcing and so on. So we tend to turn to many of the big survey programs, things like the demographic information household surveys or the multi-indicator cluster surveys, which I think are well known to anyone working in social statistics and the social sciences. The problem with that is, of course, many of these survey programs, as excellent as they are and as informative as they are done at the household level, and disaggregating data that's been collected at the household level, often through consultation with just one respondent, often a male household head, of course, only allows for a very modest amount of household understanding. And as we all know from our family lives, dynamics within households are much more complicated than first meets the eye. And taking these aggregate snapshots of well-being are really concealing a great number of differences and different experiences for men and women. And we can see that these challenges are particularly acute in the areas of economics, environment, and human security, including issues of violence against women, where there really is a paucity of data across the continent, but worldwide as well. And sadly, the pandemic has in many ways exacerbated this. Although lots of countries, of course, rolled out social protection measures, labour market measures in response to COVID, in a survey that was done recently in 42 countries worldwide, only 20% of those countries had gender sensitive measures in place, and only 10% of all social protection and social labour market measures taken in response to COVID-19 were aimed at strengthening women's economic empowerment and security. So we're really seeing that, as we wrestle with complex transboundary challenges, no better demonstrated than during the pandemic, these gendered experiences become all the more acute, and we really need to have better information in order to monitor them. But it's not all bleak. And I just wanted to share a few remarks on some really exciting solutions and innovations that we're seeing emerging. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from the panelists today to tell us in much more detail about some of the programs and sort of operations that they're performing at the moment in order to try and respond to some of these challenges. So I think the first area that was mentioned by William and also by Shada is thinking about alternative data sources and really how we can harness new technologies and approaches in order to respond to some of these gaps. There are innovations happening in so many areas, and I can't do justice to them in a few minutes, but just a couple of examples to highlight from specifically across the continent. The first is in the area of rapid assessments. This is really trying to take things like survey tools and existing technologies, but do them in a much more dynamic way, in some ways a lighter way, harness new technologies like SMS, other forms of social media analytics, in order to do these kinds of surveys and assessments really quickly. And we've seen some great results with this in recent years. For example, UN Women in 2020 launched a rapid gender assessment survey of women's unpaid care work burdens, which were changing as a result of COVID-19, and enabled things like SMS messaging of respondents, and had some really interesting preliminary results of the impact of the pandemic, and were able to design policies and respond accordingly. Likewise, we're seeing a huge number of countries taking a greater interest in and use of geospatial data. In Sierra Leone, for example, in a partnership with the Grid 3 project, the ministry is starting to look at how geographic remoteness is affecting schooling and women and girls' outcomes in educational dimensions. So again, just really interesting examples of what can be done by overlaying geospatial data with existing survey and administrative data. In terms of social media analysis, some great examples from Zimbabwe. IFAS has been working with local women's legal associations and CSO groups, trying to help them through social media do training to recognize different forms of violence against women and be able to report on that much more frequently and in a more dynamic way. And then lastly, another really exciting field is citizen-generated data, and I think we might hear more about that today throughout the course of the presentations. But so just lots of different areas where innovators, like many of the people on the line today, are really trying to look at new approaches and be a bit more dynamic in trying to respond to these data gaps. And the innovations don't just stop there. We're also seeing them around the area of data communications and data use. In data communications, I've already mentioned social media platforms and their potential for data production, but of course also for disseminating interesting gender data and statistics. And we've heard a lot already about that. Well, we've already heard mention, and we'll learn more in a bit about the Gender Data Network's work, looking at how you can train and engage with journalists to encourage better use and uptake of gender data. On the use side, of course, peer-to-peer learning and exchange is a huge area of opportunity, as is virtual learning. And if there's a real upside to the COVID pandemic, it is that there has been this absolute boost in virtual learning and exchange, and just highlighting that the overall market for online education is projected to reach $350 billion by 2025. So there's a huge interest and appetite for these kinds of tools, and I think they offer great potential moving forward. Given tight time, I'm going to stop there, but suffice to say that there is a lot of energy and excitement, a huge number of innovations, and really now it's about trying to harness the best of those, take them to scale and work with all of you and across the continent to be able to roll these out across more countries. So I look forward to learning more about that today and hearing from your experiences, and looking forward to the rapid progress in this area. So thank you very much. Over to Miriam now.
Thank you, Jess. So let me present the Gender Data Network, even if you heard a lot about it, and probably a lot of what I'm going to share is going to be repeating information. But currently, the network is a network of gender statisticians from national statistical offices from 15 African countries. And as you heard, it's a collaboration between UNECA, Data2x, Open Data Watch, and Paris 21. Since 2019, when it was launched, it was hosted by UNECA, and in 2021, the Secretariat moved to Paris 21 to expand the network globally. So what is the overall goal of the network? The goal is to improve the production and use of gender data within national statistical systems, and so by raising the standard of gender data production, improving the effectiveness of communication of and about gender data, and encouraging gender data use across participating countries. So what exactly, how are we trying to achieve that? So we want to understand the challenges that countries are facing in relation to the production, communication, and use of gender data, but also explore some innovative solutions to these challenges. And last but not least, we want to give our members confidence, credibility, and so they can raise their status within their organization, but also within their countries at regional and international levels. So how do we get there? So we try to connect our member to the wider global community that has interest in gender data. We also strengthen our members' capacity by fostering gender data expertise, facilitating cross-country learning, enabling capacity building and training. And also we make sure that our members are aware of the latest methodologies to close common gender data gaps. So what does it mean in practice? What are the kind of activities we do? We had one in-person meeting before the global health crisis in November of 2019. And since then, all the trainings and meetings have been online. But we have various trainings and meetings on issues that are of interest to our members. We also organize public-facing events, such as this webinar. And also we have regular one-on-one meetings with our members to check in on what they are doing and checking on their needs. And we highlight our members in the media and at public events to make sure their work is valued, and also to ensure our members raise their ability to present and their skills. So this has happened for example, at the UN World Data Forum, or this year at the Global Forum for Gender Statistics. And also we support our members on specific requests. So thank you for your attention, and I'll pass over to Jay.
Thank you both for setting the scene for our discussion today and really contextualizing the conversation that we'll be having. I'd like to now introduce our first panel of the day on integrating alternative data sources to close gender data gaps. And we are joined by an esteemed set of speakers. So please join me in welcoming Gloria Akoto-Bamfo, Principal Statistician at the Ghana Statistical Services, Dr. Bapu Vetla, a fellow at Data2x, Mahadia Tunga, Director of Data Science, Research, and Capacity Development at the Tanzania Data Lab, and finally, Dr. Tara Cookson, the Canada Research Chair in Gender Development and Global Public Policy at the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at the University of British Columbia, and the co-founder of Ladysmith. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And now I'd like to pass it over to Gloria to get us started with a discussion on using citizen-generated data to generate gender-based violence statistics. Over to you, Gloria.
Okay, thank you, Jay. And I guess I need to share my screen myself. Okay.
Yes, if that's possible.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I guess you can see my screen now.
Yep, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you once again, and good afternoon to you all. My name is Gloria from the Ghana Statistical Service, and I'm here to share with you our experiences, just highlights of what we did on citizen-generated data using to collect data on gender-based violence. As we all know, gender-based violence issues are very sensitive issues that people, by one way or the other, are afraid to sometimes go to report to get help for reasons best known to them, such as stigmatization and delay in addressing some of these issues. So we decided to use the citizen data approach to pilot to see if we can get some of these responses coming in. So how did it all start? In 2016, we had a data roadmap forum, out of which came some data priorities that we needed to go through, including filling the data gaps, encouraging data use, and strengthening the entire data ecosystem, which brought along various experts from the national, the global world. And in it, we found out that exploring the new sources and types of data was very key. So this is what has led us into our activities from then. And the main objective for the citizen-generated data approach to collect gender-based violence was to use the CGD as a complementary data source for official statistics. And through the pilots, our main aim was to explore the use of CGD methodologies to collect data on gender-based violence on the SDG indicators for gender, that is 5.2.1, specifically 5.2.2, 11.7.2, and 16.2.3. And again, to augment the statistics production for evidence-based decision-making at the subnational level. And lastly, to document and learn and share the learning process to other national statistical systems and the statistical community in general, like we are just doing now. So in order to push this project forward, we had a project set up. And firstly, I must say that the project was anchored in a human rights-based approach to data, where the citizens were involved in the planning and the production of the data itself. In that, in the beginning, we went into the pilot districts to also have a situation analysis to hear from them. What do they think about the issues? How do they think we can gather around, or what methods do they think is appropriate to use to collect data like this, and to hear also a little bit of the experiences and how we can go around the project. So we went down to the level and did the situational analysis, and we had some inputs. And again, the project was also a co-ownership between the Ghana Statistical Service and the line ministries to connect the data producers and the users. Key among them were the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection. And as I already said, the pilot was done in 3 districts, specifically in 3 ecological zones, which was fairly distributed within the zones that we have. And we used the human-centered design thinking approach for the software development. We brought on board various soft tech organizations. We threw to them the situation on the ground, how through the design thinking approach, we gave them the ideas. We asked them, this is what we have. How can we also use technology to help us to come out with something to gather data in this nature? So to push the project, we formed a national technical team made up with the key stakeholders, including with the Statistical Service doing the coordination, together with our line ministries, the Ministry of Gender. We had a technical support partners, the GIZ, who gave us some technical support as well as the main financial support. The Global Partnership for Sustainable Development also was on board, and all the line key agencies that we thought fit into this project, including the academia and the National Commission for Civic Education, to help us with the publicity aspect of it. And a similar team, a technical team, was also organized at the district level. The district in which the pilot was taking place, we replicated a similar technical team, which we termed the district technical team. So in all this, at the end of the day, we were able to come out with a solution, which is an app which we named the Let's Talk app. And it was a smartphone app as well as the interactive voice response service, where users can anonymously record information on their experiences on gender-based violence. And I must say, it was an open source. And before we deployed this system, we went down to test it in the pilot districts for them to know what we had. We took them through the necessary steps on how to get the apps, made sure that they really understood it before the deployment. So we did the testing, then finally we deployed it for people who are interested to use it within the pilot districts to come out and use them. So at the end of the day, we realized that using this approach, out of the data that come in, 61% who filed the reports were females, with 62% of the victims being females. You could see that a lot of females were reporting, notwithstanding 38% males. And we realized that the common age group for victim age was between the 20 and 29. We had a lot of victims within that age group. And encouragingly enough, we had 24% of the data that came in were from victims who had some kind of disability, which was very encouraging, that all manner of people, all kinds of people across were using it. So looking at how it was used again, we realized the interactive voice system was dominantly used. We had 56 of the respondents that came in using the IVR, with 24% preferring to use the voice reporting. On the app, we made it in such a way that you could have the voice prompt as well as the texting method, whichever way on the smart system. That is, we had the voice reporting and the texting. And we also made available the various languages within the districts that we were piloting. So we had the languages in addition to English on the app on both the IVR and the SMART application. And afterwards, we tried comparing the data that came in with national data. We have this agency, Domestic Violence and Victim Support Unit. They are a section under the police who are there to address domestic violence issues. So we took the data that came in within the 3 months, the 2 months period that we collected the data, and to the data that they also had. And we realized that we had a lot of reporting coming in against what they had collected. For instance, in the whole municipality, in the year 2020, they had 61 cases coming in for the various type of defilement. So we were like, oh, indeed, this thing has really helped, and people were really, because of its anonymized kind of thing, people were really willing to come in to use it as a report measure. And in the app, we made available places to visit if you feel you have an issue and you want to report. Because for us, our main aim was the data aspect of it. So as a next step for whoever responded to the app, if you want to do a further investigation or report, we gave the various agencies that you can move on to do the reporting. So we realized that the data that came in compared with the national data was very encouraging, that the use of the app is recommended. So in the process, we had some learnings. We realized that the CGD can add value to the production of statistics at the national level, though there's still more research to be done in this area in terms of understanding the possible data products. And again, realize that many of the users that use the app opted for the voice system of reporting, where they also had an option to text. And the users also prefer to report in the local language when they are given the choice. And the app itself, we realize that people are willing to report issues on behalf of others' experiences of gender-based violence, which was very encouraging, because sometimes somebody will be in the corner suffering, not knowing what to do, but if they are able or lucky to have somebody who really cares, they can go ahead and complain on their behalf. So we found out some of these things coming up, which was very encouraging. And again, in the coming out with the process, that means building up the technology to use, we also had a lot of learnings from it. And the convening of the project between GSS and the appropriate line ministries enabled a deeper sense of ownership and commitment of the program, because people were really dedicated. All the members, the district team, the national team, you could feel a sense of belongingness of the project ownership. And again, it's created a space for developers to build familiarity with social issues from both the experts to the users. And the user-sensitive human-centered design on decisions. Over here, this kind of decisions, human-centered design decisions could also be made at this point. And the most effective public education strategy was the face-to-face engagements that we had when we went into the pilot districts to, give out or make known the product that we wanted to give them. And the district technical teams at this point identified the need to build confidence with technology, because most of the data that we have, there are a lot of data that are coming from the districts. And at this point, they realized and they had the confidence that indeed we can use technology in this wise to collect data in our districts to inform policy decision making within our district to make our district better. And again, virtual engagement. At some point in time, we made use of virtual engagement when we were strapped with COVID-19 in the initial stages, and we were not allowed to go out or have face-to-face in-person meet. We started.
I think we may have lost Gloria there, or maybe I did. So sorry about that.
Yeah, we lost Sarah.
We lost our sound, so maybe we move on.
Okay. Well, thank you, Gloria. I hope you can hear us, but thank you so much for that presentation. I'd like to next, if we can stop the screen share, I'd like to next pass the floor over to Bapu for his presentation on the promises and pitfalls of using big data.
Thank you to everyone from the Africa Gender Data Network for this presentation. I am from Data2x. I am a Data2x fellow. Can you see my screen? Is it sharing now? Yeah.
Yep, we can.
Great. So I'll try to go through this quickly because I know we're a little short on time. I want to start by just talking about this question about how Data2x thinks about big data. As you all know, there's no consensus definition of big data. The data science community continues to debate this topic. At Data2x, we use big data and digital data, those two phrases, somewhat interchangeably, and consider that typically big data is data that's finely disaggregated in both space and time. Mostly, though, we think of big data in terms of its functional value, and we think specifically that when it's used in concert with other forms of traditional data, it allows a nuanced and effective response to fast-moving situations like pandemics or recessions, natural disasters. And it allows micro-targeting of vulnerable and marginalized groups. So that captures that time element and space element. Just to give an example, one particularly, I think, impressive example of how we have facilitated the use of big data for investigating gendered questions, including gender-based violence. A few years ago, we funded Girija Borker, who was a doctoral candidate at Brown University and now is at the World Bank, to look at the issue of street harassment and educational choices in New Delhi, India. So what you see here on your screen right now is crowdsourced safety incident records. So all over the city where this app is transmitting information about specific incidents that have happened, the red areas represent a higher frequency of safety street harassment incidents. What Dr. Borker did is convert that point frequency estimate to a continuous landscape across the entire city of New Delhi. So again, you see the red areas that have very low safety and the green areas that are relatively safer. The next map is a little bit hard to see because of the colors, but if you look at the, there's a small blue and magenta line that's running through the map, and that represents a metro line and then a bus line. So what Dr. Borker did is looked at all of the transport options that girls and women were using to travel to educational institutions and effectively calculated a safety score. One can imagine many kinds of policy applications this information can be used for, including changing the routes of public transit, creating street lighting, creating greater security patrols in areas that are high risk. To zoom back out, we, over the last few years at Data2x, have seen that big data has great promise. It offers unique insights into the lives of women and girls. Partially, this is because some forms of big data are inherently disaggregated by sex, and data sources are often available at the individual level, which is something that a lot of traditional sources don't offer. We also see that big data can measure phenomena that are typically unseen by other methods. Digital records, as people live more of their life online, they leave passive traces of behavior, and big data can pick that up. We also see that gender-sensitive big data is ready to scale and integrate with traditional data. Many big data sources are already at scale. Mobile operator data is a good example where mobile technologies and even smartphones are reaching all corners of the globe and even the range of socioeconomic classes. Now, the important thing to remember with this is that traditional data sources are needed to use big data effectively. They're needed for validation. They're needed for interpreting big data. They're needed for context setting. Often big data and traditional data are portrayed as being at odds with each other, but in fact, they're complementary and necessary to each other. Here's another example of that point about complementarity. On the left, most of the people here are probably familiar with the demographic and health surveys that are done in countries across the world. You see the results of the one variable that's often found in those demographic and health surveys. This is the percentage of women engaged in agricultural livelihoods in Nepal. And you see that in Nepal, the DHS data only allows you to get a picture at the province level, and the 6 or 7 provinces that are in Nepal, the 7 and then 8, including Kathmandu, are it's a very coarse-grained look at this particular variable of women engaged in agricultural livelihoods. But what you can do is when you use big data sources, and specifically geospatial sources, and correlate them with these coarse-grained estimates, you can develop a more continuous and fine-grained map across the country. And that's what you see on the right side of the screen here. This is, again, the same variable, women engaged in agricultural livelihoods, but at a resolution of 1 square kilometer. And this work was done by the Flowminder Foundation. Again, Data2x funded and facilitated this research. There are, however, dangers to using big data. One of them is the question of bias in big data sets. Gendered access to technology means that data sets are sometimes not representative, particularly of gender and class and urban-rural residents. And these biases can be reproduced and in fact amplified by the use of algorithms that analyze and otherwise deal with the data. Also, there's cultural bias in institutions that do the analysis, that do the data collection, and that this kind of cultural bias makes catching the bias inside the data sets or the algorithms very difficult, catching and correcting for it very difficult. We also know that privacy and security issues have to be confronted immediately and confronted head on. There's specific risks to the privacy of women and girls that exist, as well as other populations that are already politically marginalized. The good news is that there is right now a great deal of innovation in security protocols and high potential for safe and security data sharing. The larger point is that representation in these processes is absolutely critical. So we can have some technical solutions around privacy or debiasing data sets, but in the end, women and girls have to be central to data governance. The risk of, we know that in the past, the usage of technology has amplified inequalities. The risk of duplicating past failures and ensuring that technology benefits everyone depends on whether women and girls are involved in the process of data governance. The question really is to ask who has the power and assure that if we're going to have representation, we need participation in all processes of data science and the use of big data. We need formal structures that allow everyone to take part in deciding how their data is used and how they're remunerated for the use of that data. We find that the emerging framework of data feminism asks those questions: who has power? How do we challenge inequality? How do we eliminate context? A quick look at the current landscape of big gender data. We see that the last speakers emphasized that COVID-19 is leading to a lot of gendered impacts on the well-being of women and girls, and we don't have a lot of data on those impacts. On the other hand, there are now new initiatives that COVID-19, the recession, is catalyzing around gender research and big data research more generally for the use of in policymaking. We're also progressing in certain topics like mobility, health, and social norms through this combination of big and traditional data. So we're seeing a lot of progress in specific areas. That being said, we're lagging in areas like economic opportunity and human security and public participation. So lots of creative thinking that needs to be done about how we use big data sources for these kinds of areas. We also have to acknowledge that attaining gender representative samples is still a challenge, but there has been some progress using big data. I'll conclude by saying that there are emerging opportunities in working with the private sector and reusing data from these large private companies safely, particularly tech companies, and this data is very useful for policymaking. Also, there are emerging models about how civil society and the public sector, statistical agencies, and the private sector, multilateral organizations can work together in enduring partnerships to make sure that big data enters the policy process. That's all. Thank you. And again, thank you for the Gender Data Network, Paris 21 Open Data Watch for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Bapu. I'll now pass the floor over to Mahalia to share her thoughts on the opportunities and challenges of using different data sources to produce gender statistics in Tanzania.
I think you're muted, Mahadi,
Thank you so much for catching that.
Sorry, I could continue. I could just go on and on. So hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and share our context in terms of opportunities and challenge of using different data sources to produce gender statistics. And as for DLab, why we're interested in producing or generating gender statistics mainly is informing our own programs, because we're doing a lot of interventions at lower primary school level, secondary level, and at the national level. So we normally use gender data to inform our intervention. So give you a context in terms of, So to give you a context in terms of challenges, so the challenge as most of African countries face, data itself regarding gender data, data itself is not fully accessible online, as data might be available, but not really online. And that was just from the Open Data Barometer in terms of Sub-Sahara. Only 2 out of 375 data sets in Sub-Sahara are truly open. So the first biggest challenge is the availability of data in terms of online availability of data. So data could be available, but not accessible. So that's the main challenge. And in terms of Tanzania, in 2017, Tanzania withdrew from Open Government Partnership. And that led for most of actors shying away from actually sharing the data online. So that is also another challenge. And around 2019, so we had open data portal where you can, we were able to access data from water, education, health, and those statistics from National Bureau of Statistics. But this was a project and a World Bank project. So when the project ended, the portal was after a few years after the project ended, the portal was no longer supported. So that's another challenge, as most of these initiatives to put data online or for open data, I would say are mostly pilot project or donor funded, and so not sustainable. So data, it might be available today, but after sometimes when the project is not there, it's not available. So that's the challenge. Now I think is the bigger question, how can we create ownership on the process so that the investment that we are putting in becomes sustainable. So how do we create that sustainability vehicle? I see that as a key challenge in terms of the sub-Saharan context in Tanzania, inclusive. So this is the status of gender disaggregated statistics. So this was by World Foundation in 2019. So those are from those 3 sectors. From national statistics, health, education, and crime. So those how gender, that's the percentage in which the data is disaggregated. So you can just get a picture. So that is in the sub-Saharan context, but some of the countries are more worse than that. And some of the areas, we know that the data is not completely disaggregated. So if you look at crime statistics, if it's only 6%, so that means even the intervention that we are making might not be really inclusive. So, and putting it again into our own context, women are not online. So in Tanzania, and it's only 77% of women own mobile phone, but only 17 of women who have access to mobile phones with internet access. So then we are missing out women online. So as my brother Bapu said, so now when we talk about big data sources, so that means the big data sources might not really be inclusive, because we are missing out a number of women. When we talk about those algorithms, as you mentioned, clearly they are not going to be inclusive because we have less women online. So this is the biggest the challenge in terms of our context. So this living alone other challenge, cultural challenge that exists, whether some of the women are actually allowed to use those mobile phones or not. But this is the challenge. And another challenge in our own context is also historical data. So we happen actually to conduct a survey. I conducted a survey and we wanted to understand what's the key challenge. And we realized, so at the design, while we are designing intervention in collection, in generating data set, but there's less thought on where is this data going to sit and for how long is going to be there. So most of the projects, you'll find that when we want to access data, you'll be directed to an individual, especially in non-state actors who are collecting a lot of data. So this data will be mapped to an individual, a certain statistician, ICT personnel. So in that case, we don't have historical data. When they move to another areas of work, that data you cannot get. So it's hard to establish that trend data. And data is donor dependent, I already mentioned, and there's a lot of challenges in terms of data silos. And if you want to get the big picture now, that becomes a challenge. And to sum it up on the challenge aspect is also, we don't have common standard across different data sources. We are working at the local government level, and we understand the local government level in Tanzania is like the main data sources. Most data is being collected at that point, but across different departments we don't have data standards. And when it comes to gender data, so we also don't have standard in terms of terms on how data are being collected. The tools themselves are not standardized. So it becomes complicated to actually merge data from these different sources. And also, I think a previous speaker also mentioned on the challenges on the granularity. So most of this data that we are using, most of them are from the surveys. So if these are from the survey, so most of the time they're at the regional level, but if you want to do an effective intervention, you need a granular data so that you can design interventions that and calibrate efforts at a right level. So that's the challenge in our context as well. Most data is at the regional. Most data is at the regional level. That's what is published. And if you're lucky, you get it at the district level, but it's hard to get data at the ward level. And also the comparison across different domains. There are sectors where we have, I would say we are doing better in terms of data collection, but other sector, it's hard to get data. And so that's the challenge. So lack of the comparability across domain, and also limited of coverage and representation. I would just for instance, in Tanzania, we know 68% of women are engaged in agriculture. But then if I want to understand from which region, and then if I want to get what types of actually crops these women are engaging on, it's hard to get such kind of data. So just get the aggregated statistics, but it's hard to go dip into lower level. So that's the challenge. In terms of opportunity, I think these are the three that I think that we can. So in terms of Tanzania, and I think most of sub-Saharan Africa, so in Tanzania, we see only 17% of women have mobile phones with internet. So there is opportunity to work on getting more women online as the first steps, and getting more people getting more women online. And it should be noted, it's not the issue of just supplying them with mobile phone with internet, but creating a safe space for women online. We have seen a lot of challenges in Tanzania, especially for women leaders, the way they are being attacked. And people fetching back their history, etc., just to so the environment is not really safe, the online space for women. So that's I think it's the area where we can intervene. And I think this is also a call for state and non-state actors and across the region to collaborate in filling in the gaps. So this cannot be a silo effort or central government effort. We need all state and non-state actors to collaborate in filling in the gap. And lastly, this is entirely for Tanzania. This year we have national census. So this is the right place for non-state actors to engage the government in ensuring that these statistics that are going to be produced by the census, like they are shared at a granular level, they are gender disaggregated, so that we are able to make decision, because that is going to be a comprehensive and complete data. So yeah, so these are the three areas that I think we can intervene. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahadia, for that country level perspective. I now welcome our final speaker for the panel, Dr. Tara Cookson, to give her presentation on the use of the Gender Data Kit in South America. Over to you, Tara.
Great, thank you. It's asking me to wait on the screen share, so just bear with me a moment here. There we go. Great. Okay. And so it's really a pleasure to be here with you all today. I work primarily in Latin America, so it's really nice to know what's going on in sub-Saharan Africa with a number of these alternative data cases too. So today I'm sharing lessons learned from a use case of our gender data kit, our alternative gender data project called Cosas de Mujeres, which roughly translates in English to women's stuff. And we're coming up on 3 years in the design and implementation of this project. So I'm really happy to share a number of the reflections and lessons learned. So first, in terms of context. So Latin America is currently going through one of the largest humanitarian migration flows in contemporary history. And gender-based violence along the Colombia-Venezuela border, where it's migrants coming out of Venezuela and into kind of north, south, east, and west. We work primarily in Colombia. And we know that gender-based violence is a very serious problem. And the impetus, the motivation for our gender data project came because we were hearing from donors, humanitarian response organizations, public service providers saying we can't adequately respond unless we have timely data on the gender-based violence that is occurring. And so we said, okay, I think we're up to the task. We're gonna try to do this, even while understanding, and this is something that's really important to us at Ladysmith, that we know that gender-based violence occurs in all conflict situations. So we sort of take this ask with a pinch of salt, but in order to move forward. So our solution is Cosas de Mujeres, or women's stuff. So we leverage WhatsApp to connect Colombian and Venezuelan women to available services that prevent and respond to gender-based violence. We use WhatsApp because we conducted a scoping study and found that most migrant women either had a mobile phone themselves that had WhatsApp, or they knew someone trusted who did, a friend, a neighbor, a daughter, etc. And they also had access to data. So there are Wi-Fi spots along the way that like mobile phone cards work, often like you get a whole bunch of free data. So it wasn't necessarily contingent on access to internet data, mobile data on the phone. So we leverage WhatsApp. Second, we partner with grassroots feminist organizations and local service providers to map and ground truth what services are available for migrant women, because this is a situation where you're arriving to a brand new country, a brand new context, a different political system, and you're having to sort of figure out, where can I go to get help? And then we produce actionable data about the problem of gender-based violence, as well as potential solutions to gender-based violence in this specific context. So women who are arriving into the city of Cúcuta, one of the cities we work in, or in Cartagena, another of the cities, or Bucaramanga, we're then able to understand what are women asking for in this specific context, and then feed that information up. So what does the data look like? So we take qualitative data, which is message content, and we quantify it and then publish it into mixed methods data briefs or reports. And you can find these at genderdatakit.org or on the Ladysmith website. The data that we collect is primarily around types of violence, similar to Gloria's program, as well as barriers to accessing existing services. So we get lots of information on the distance between women and services, that really important sexual and reproductive health clinics have the wrong opening hours, or it's varying. A particular service might have requirements that aren't advertised and might be discriminating when it comes to access. We get information about the quality of the existing services. Do they have supplies or not? How are women being treated when they show up there? How is a trans migrant woman being treated when she shows up there, et cetera? We also get forward-looking data, what we think of as kind of like moving beyond. And that's around the types of services or supports desired. Maybe it's in Cartagena, when a women's shelter was closed, it was like immediate. We knew that shelter needed to open back up from what we were hearing from women, and eventually did. And also unforeseen and emerging issues. We were hearing from women the day after Colombia instituted the lockdown, when COVID hit, that migrant women and their children were being kicked out of the houses they had been hosted in or that they were renting in, and they were houseless. So we knew that before policymakers were even talking about it. So the timeliness is a really big thing. So how do we make the data actionable? Because we talk a lot about the report that Data2x published at the end of 2021 that found that so many of our gender data interventions are actually at the near end of the pipeline in terms of production, but we need a lot more efforts to connect the data to action. We really appreciate that. So we strive to meet medium to long-term and short-term gender equality goals. In the medium to long term, we routinely share insights and recommendations that we generate through our project with state institutions, including the National Statistical Office, DANE, humanitarian and development organizations, donors, civil society, all through these Spanish and English data briefs. And whenever we publish one of those, we host an open webinar that any of the actors responding to the migration crisis are able to join. And finally, trainings. So for example, we, upon learning that when women went to report violence to a police officer at the outset of the pandemic, sometimes they were turned away, that this wasn't actually urgent, this wasn't a real danger, sort of kind of go home and try to work it out type of thing. And so we designed and implemented a sensitivity training with the police so that they could gain some insights into this new population that they were dealing with and respond in a way that was a bit more just and caring, as we'd say. So that's the medium to long-term piece, because the changing of services, the changing of policies, that takes time. That doesn't necessarily help the woman who is experiencing violence immediately right now, or who might even experience it in the next week or in the next month. So in addition to having our eyes sort of set on the longer term horizon, we also try to meet women's immediate needs with providing them this information about what does exist and where is it safe to go, where are they going to find some support. And that also includes support among and from local women's groups. So we work with feminist and women's community leaders to also connect women when they are arriving or when they are in a violent situation. And we see this as a real value add and unique piece of the puzzle, in that we're not only kind of extracting data, but we're also offering something that helps meet this immediate need. So some advantages of our alternative data project. We've been thinking a lot about these kinds of projects in terms of possibilities and limitations, and these are what we think of as possibilities. So as I mentioned with the COVID-19 case, the data is really timely. We'll often also hear if a clinic is all of a sudden closed that women had been using, we hear about it right away. Second, this type of data really does elevate women's voices, their perspectives, their needs, their priorities, not only in terms of what they have or are experiencing, but also what they need in the long term, what they would like to see in terms of services or other supports. Often varying from, we need this shelter reopened, to, we need a cash transfer, or, we need the particular cards for education so that our children can be educated. And like I said, it meets some short-term needs while also helping address the long-term problems. And for some of the limitations of our data project. So first, in terms of representativeness, it doesn't capture everybody. It is contingent upon women having a mobile phone, and I won't elaborate on that because my previous colleagues have on that point, but it is something that we bear in mind. Second, not all data needs can be met. So at the start of the project, when we were in the design phase, we spoke with all kinds of government service providers, donors, civil society actors, and asked them, what kind of data do you need? And we heard a lot about data disaggregation. You know, we need the data disaggregated not only by sex or by gender, but also sexual orientation, migration status, age, location, ethnicity, language, etc. But that kind of disaggregation also presents very real safety concerns. And while we can be very forward-looking in terms of wanting to have, you know, an intersectional perspective or an intersectional analysis, it's really incumbent upon us as people who, you know, work with data in these kind of new and alternative data sources to really be aware that every time you add another layer of disaggregation, you're actually potentially peeling away a layer of privacy or safety, because those groups become more easily identifiable. And third, there is no gold standard for data rights. So this really presents a challenge when we're thinking through issues of like consent, or, you know, how is WhatsApp changing its end-to-end encryption policies, or where they're storing their data, et cetera. So these are things that we need to sort of be on our toes with. And so finally, I'll offer just a couple of examples on how we overcome some of these challenges. So first, in terms of, you know, our data doesn't represent everyone, we partner with producers of more conventional or official data. So we work with DANE, the Colombian National Statistical Agency. This is a brief that we published on migrant women in the Colombian context, and focusing particularly on labor. But DANE, of course, has these national statistics, not all of which are catching migrant women, and we're able to bring in that focus of what are we hearing from migrant women in the sort of qualitative place in things. And in order to make this relationship really work, you know, it was spanned over a long period of time. We were talking for over a year. What could we do? What does your data offer? What can my data offer to pull together something that was really robust and useful for actors in the Colombian context? And second, the issue of dealing with data rights. So we call it using the feminist library, and we also consult really widely on this. So one, we're always looking to human rights agencies for what standards are being developed and iterated upon. Two, we're looking to feminist scholars who are working on data and AI privacy, identity protection. The Feminist AI Network is a really interesting group that's thinking through a lot of these things. They're a great resource to go to. And tech and data science experts who may not be experts in gender equality, but who really understand how these tools work, what the possibilities and limitations of them are from a technical perspective, from a privacy perspective. And we found that we're really needing both things. We're needing the kind of like, or I guess all three, we're needing the normative work, the very kind of cutting edge rights-based feminist work, and we're needing the technical expertise. And this has helped us inform what data we collect, how we collect it, how we store it, and our consent mechanisms. There was a question in the chat earlier. We call it our feminist data practice, and it's something that we iterate on constantly. Every time WhatsApp, you know, opens a new release, or every time that, you know, the United Nations comes out and says, okay, this is how we should think about things. We're iterating on our consent policies. And so I'll stop there, but I'll point you to another resource for more on what we've learned connecting alternative gender data to action in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And this piece reflects on what we've done with Cosas de Mujeres and our larger gender data kit, as well as learnings from a collaboration with Facebook, UNICEF, CARE, and the World Bank, where we helped Facebook conduct a survey that's now in its second year called the Survey on Gender Equality at Home, that also has data on the sub-Saharan African context, disaggregated by country, on women's and men's experiences at home during the pandemic. So I'll leave it there, and thanks very much.
Thank you so much for that informative presentation, Tara. So I think we have time for one question, and I think it'll be moderator's choice. So I'd like to go around all of our speakers today and ask one specific question in maybe 30 seconds or less. If you could think about what do you think is needed to ensure that alternative and official data sources coexist optimally within the data ecosystem? So I think we've touched a lot on different topics throughout this conversation. So I'd love to get your perspective on how we bring those together. So I think we can start with Gloria and then make our way around the table. So over to you, Gloria. Sorry, you're muted.
Thank you once again. Sorry for the last bit of my presentation. With regards to the question, I must say, firstly, we need the political buy-in in this kind of thing, because the data that we use around is what the government uses, coupled with legal backing, like statistics acts and bills and things. So these things must be entrenched in this. And again, we also need to come out with standardized methodologies on how to go about collecting these kind of alternative data sources, building up methodologies. And I'm very happy that the UN Women and other agencies have started doing that in that wise, trying to figure out, bringing out the methodologies that can be used to guide the collection of these alternative data sources, so that to be easily incorporated into the normal traditional kind of data that we collect. And lastly, over here in Ghana, it's very prudent for us to sensitize the data producers, more especially those that generate the admin kind of data, for them to know, to see the needed agency and the importance of the data that they collect. For instance, health data, data coming from the courts and all that. In this wise, over here in Statistical Service under the SDG programs and statistical NSDs, we have this project within West Africa in harmonizing statistical standards and methods. Under this project, we are trying to bring together the line ministries that are key producers of data to understand how some of these data is generated, how to produce it. So we've taken a first step and we are guiding some of the ministries on how to go about this kind of work. So that at the end of the day, these data that come in will be used to complement the already existing data sources, so that we have a rich base to inform policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Those are all very important points. So over to you, Bapu, for your perspective on how we can bring these two types of data together.
Yeah, I hope this is not too indirect of an answer to your question, but I want to emphasize the role of representation again here. I think that the technical outlook is very optimistic, and I think we're developing on an institutional level across public agencies, civil society, multilaterals, private sector, forms for collaboration. But I think what's still missing is how do the people that actually generate the data, the women and girls who are ultimately the ones who are the producers of this data, how do they have a voice in discussions around data governance? I think we've all been disenchanted in the past about participatory development language and how that is often a throwaway phrase that rarely has substantive content. But I think we are facing, when we're talking about the security and data privacy conversation, we're facing a situation where, in fact, big data cannot be used, or just generally, different forms of gender data won't be able to be used effectively for policymaking unless there are concrete forms of representation that allow women and girls to participate in answering questions like, what do what do private sector companies, what do public agencies have the right to do with my data? How do I have a chance to set boundaries around what they can do? So even further down the line, I might sign on to an initial user agreement, but then down the road, governments or anybody wants to use it for a different purpose, and I need to have some ongoing voice in that. And critically, this is not something that has come up very often, but how do people get remunerated? How do they get compensated for the data, in fact? And this is a complex question that involves questions of actually who owns the data, who has proprietary rights over data. But the fact that we need to acknowledge is whether we're talking about public agencies or private companies, this data is being used to generate value. And people should be compensated for that value in some sense. And that, I think, creates this positive cycle where people, if they see tangible benefits to their own lives of other institutions using data, they'll be more willing to share the data and knowing that that's protected. So I would say that the issue of representation, I would also point to the emerging concept of data feminism and encourage people to search online if they're not already familiar with the great body of work that's being done around that. I think that's a powerful anchor for us going forward.
Great. Thank you so much for that reminder of bringing people at the center of this conversation about data. So over to you, Mahadia, for your perspective on what is necessary to bring alternative and official data together.
So on that, I'll just share the use case. So for us, we use data. We use data to make sure that to convince the government that, I mean, this issue of non-state data or citizen-generated data need to coexist. So in 2016, we, in collaboration with Paris 21, we conducted a national data gap assessment in reporting to SDG indicators, and we realized it's only 30% of the National Bureau of Statistics data can be able to respond to the to the SDG indicators. So clearly, the government noticed that the government itself cannot be entirely the data collector. So there was need clearly to improve the policy and try and understand on the role of non-state actors. But not only that, we clearly saw that the data National Bureau of Statistics was collecting there were mismatch in terms of standard with the line ministry. So even the line ministry cannot support the National Bureau of Statistics in reporting to the SDG indicator. So in that, now we are sitting at the committee, the National Statistical Master Plan Committee, where now the citizen-generated data have been prioritized to be considered as official, official source for complementing to the national statistics. So for us, we use data to show the government that there is a gap and that we clearly need non-state actors to contribute. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that important use case. So over to you, Tara, for the last word on how we can bring these worlds together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is building a little bit on what Bapu said, but to perhaps, put a different spin and a little bit more bluntly, we need to really focus on generating the political will to address the data rights question. So if we are thinking about these alternative data sources as possible to integrate into the public sphere and into official statistics, we need a level of public education on what's going on that isn't just public education with, for example, migrant women in one context or another. But I mean, I sign on to Skype and click my data rights away without reading the 22 pages they send us. So it's really widespread, and there needs to be political will on the part of public agencies, tech companies, et cetera, to really educate on this, so that when we do participate, that we are actually participating with full information. Yeah.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers for such a robust and informative discussion. I know I speak probably for all panelists and speakers when I say and attendees that I really learned a lot from that session. And I know we don't have a lot of time for other questions, but I encourage you all to respond to relevant questions in the chat. And I think we can now move on to the next and final segment of our time together today. And I'd like to introduce my colleague, Lawrence Noy, the research manager at Open Data Watch, who will be giving us a presentation on how we can improve data use. So over to you, Lawrence.
Thank you, Jake. Let me just share my screen real quick. Okay, great. Thanks again, Jay, for these words of introduction. And thanks so much to the panelists and audience members so far for a really rich discussion, particularly this last session on so many great use cases at the country level. I'm going to zoom all the way out in my presentation, so excuse the whiplash potentially, but really the topic of my brief intervention is to talk about moving from data production to impact by improving data use, including for gender data, although the framework I'll present covers all official statistics produced by NSOs and the wider NSS. This is a big topic that comes from big demands placed on national statistical systems and private organizations. As we know, the availability of some data, although we've seen not all, has increased exponentially over the past decades. And today, you've all seen statistics like this, that billions of gigabytes of data are being generated every day, but both the private and public sector see much of their data go unused. Though data can be used and reused indefinitely, most of them don't end up used and reused, and instead end up in what Samantha Custer has termed data graveyards. With this language in mind, SCSN Trends and OEW have been working on a way to demystify data use for NSOs and NSS entities, how to improve it, and I'm excited to share some work we've done so far in this work stream. So moving back briefly into the history of this concept for a minute, data use in the post-2015 SDG data agenda have really gone hand in hand. There's been increasing emphasis over the last several years on data use from the Development Cooperation Report from the OECD, the most recent World Development Report, as well as the Cape Town Global Action Plan on data, which in its strategic area 4 highlights the dissemination and use of development data as a primary focus, among many other frameworks that people on the call will be familiar with. The way we're thinking about this data use is really about moving up the data value chain, which begins with data collection and publication, but which really only leads to the desired impact and realization of the value of data through use and reuse of data. Most statistical activities continue to take place on this left-hand side of the data value chain, so we need to integrate an understanding of how these data will be used throughout the steps of regular statistical production and dissemination. So this recognition of the importance of data use for statistical systems has been growing, but it continues to be a black box for policymakers who are trying to actually take steps to improve the use of their data. What we're proposing in this current project, therefore, is a vision of a transformation process for data use, so policymakers are able to map their own activities against this process to improve data use. This is the transformation process in question. It takes as its problem statement, as I've stated, that official statistics too often end up in data graveyards. And the current state that we've already detailed is a lack of data use in decision-making, general lack of trust and awareness of NSO data across the user spectrum, weak feedback loops between users and producers of NSO data, and data governance that limits data use. The state we want to get to on the right-hand side is characterized by improved services, increased evidence, informed decision-making, and better results tracking to hold governments to account. How do we get there? This is where this middle part comes in, which we see as being a problem chiefly of capacity, namely the capacity to govern data, meet the needs of users, and to use data, both from the NSO and citizen perspective. Certain conditions, such as political will to implement changes in procedures and policies, the financing needed to improve these capacities, and the technical infrastructure, such as internet connectivity, which is part of certain solutions for improving data use, are not part of this framework, but we recognize that they will act as supports or constraints on the ability of an NSO to act. So I want to briefly cover these three capacity aspects and what we mean by them. First, we have the need to improve capacity to govern data, which involves developing national and organizational strategies and policies that enable data use and build all the way to creating a culture of data use. This is enabled by planning documents, such as national strategies for the development of statistics and data sharing policies, as well as human resources efforts that will create teams that can upskill and take a user perspective in national and statistical production efforts, which I'll get into later. Laws and regulations around data privacy and NSO mandates are also part of the governance frameworks that can enable data use. Next, we have the need to improve the capacity to meet the needs of users. This is part and parcel of strengthening feedback loops between users and producers, as data producers need to be able to recognize demand by knowing who the users are and what data they want. Existing guidelines on data production, from domestic guidelines, international levels, can also act as signals of what's being demanded. By strengthening these feedback loops, NSOs will also find what data characteristics meet user needs. This can be in terms of quality of data, timeliness, and the ways of accessing data. This is also just not a one-off exercise. As implied in the name feedback loop, this is a continuous way of interacting between users and producers that will keep both sides continuously engaged, which is why the previous bucket on policies and strategies has to enable an NSO to spend time and money on this. Finally, we need to improve the capacity to use data. This refers to both users in terms of their data literacy, which covers basic education, another area that straddles what NSOs can and can't control, but certainly when working with statistics, NSOs and NSS entities can be powerful partners for increasing skills. Harking back to knowing your audience, these skills will vary across types of users, whether they're from civil society, private companies, or media outlets. Similarly, depending on the solutions to these data use challenges, producers have to continually upskill in terms of data. They're obviously the experts and have much more background in statistics and data than the average user, but integrating new data types that respond to demand for data by citizens and the ability to publish data in a user-friendly way need to be continually trained. The final product of this transformation process is to pair this high-level framework with country case studies, including on gender data specifically, so countries are able to see what could work in their context and chart a way forward to improving data use. What I presented today is our first step. We're now entering the consultative part of our work. We're presenting this at events like the one today, and we're looking forward to hearing people's reactions in the chat or later on via email and outcome documents. And we're also organizing a side event at the UN Statistical Commission on February 11th. We're also planning to send out a survey to NSOs and experts to further gather feedback on this framework and to hear about their challenges and solutions for better data use. We'll also have an in-depth engagement with a smaller number of NSOs, and we'll share the transformation process and country examples in a final report later this year. Thank you all for your attention.
Thanks so much for that presentation, Lawrence. Before we open it up for the Q&A portion of our session, I wanted to launch a short poll to better understand how the capacity gaps that you just outlined impact our participants' daily work. So Wonderber, if you could launch the poll for us today. So as you can see on the screen, we're asking which of the following capacity gaps most impact your day-to-day activities. So first, capacity to govern data. Second, capacity to meet the needs of users. Third, capacity to facilitate data use. Or fourth, other. And if you do select other, please type in the chat what you're specifically thinking about. So we'll give it a couple of seconds for folks to respond. Just so everyone knows, I can't see the poll, so I don't know what the results are. So I'll be as surprised as you once we see them. Wonderber, if you think that enough people have responded, so feel free to stop the poll when you think we have enough responses.
So far, 25 respondents pause for the question. I think
we can stop. Yeah. And then can you share the results on the screen?
Sure. From the response, around 16% of the respondents says capacity to govern data is one of the gap. And next, 36% says capacity to meet the need of users. And 40% of the respondents says capacity to facilitate data use. And lastly, 8% of the respondents says others.
Great. Thank you so much, Wonderbar, for sharing that. So it sounds like capacity to facilitate data use is the biggest issue for our audience. So that really brings me to my first question for you, Lawrence. So while you were doing this research, I'm just curious to think about what was one of the most surprising factors that you came across that inhibits data use?
I think I would probably say that option one actually was the sort of the importance of the governance frameworks was the biggest surprise for me in terms of inhibiting data use. We really kind of need NSOs and really any other producer of visual statistics to be able to be empowered both from a governance standpoint as well as kind of later on from a financing standpoint to really make data use a core part of their operations, which makes again these frameworks so important. It can start from a very high level, but ultimately it has a really important impact on the programs that are implemented on the ground to build these feedback loops between users and producers.
Great.
And of course, sorry, I'll add in a second one. Not just it's not necessarily a surprise, but just the I think agreeing with the majority answer there, just the wide range of efforts already underway by countries to address that data literacy and data engagement portion have been really interesting to see, and one that we're hoping to highlight in more country case studies in our final report.
Great, thank you so much. I think we can stop sharing the screen also. But I think that those are all really great points. Looking at the time, I think we have time for one more question. So something that came up for me when we were talking during your presentation is, I think you've given us a really good overview of the framework and also some of the immediate next steps coming out of this work. So I was just curious, sort of, how do you see countries using and benefiting from this research in the future?
As I've said, countries are already recognizing the importance of this all the way from kind of, if you go to major international conferences to events like today and to events in countries themselves, people are talking about the importance of data use and are already conducting a wide variety of activities. We're really hoping this work helps to kind of bring all of that together in a holistic framework that will allow countries to kind of map their own activities, whatever again is available to them based on their capacity to act and improve data use, and really kind of see themselves as part of this broader effort and see where more work might be necessary, and just to again integrate data use into their everyday operations for improving engagement with users.
Great, thank you. Those are really good points. And of course, I think it's important to remember that data use needs to be thought of at the start of any data collection process and not just as an afterthought. And I'm hopeful that this research and this framework will really help cement that fact. And so I think that helps us transition to the final piece of our time together. So thank you, Lawrence, again for sharing a glimpse into your research. And I know I might be biased, but I really do think it's exciting and important work. So I wanted to take this time to really thank all of our speakers and panelists for such a robust discussion so far, and really taking the time out of their days to share their reflections and their work with us. I think it was really great to learn both from the country level and research perspectives on how we can use alternative data sources. It was really helpful to think about the different enabling factors that our speakers brought up, from the legal and political will to bringing users and data producers or people whose data we are talking about at the center of our discussions, thinking about use cases for how we can integrate them into line ministries, and making sure that people are informed of how their data will be used. Tara's point about signing away your rights when you see Skype come up with the new terms of service really spoke true to me and my own experiences using things like that. So I really do hope that that session gave participants food for thought on how they can integrate non-traditional data sources within their own contexts and learn more about this important topic. And then, of course, as Lawrence just mentioned and we just talked about, collecting and generating data isn't really enough. We need to encourage better gender data use to ensure that we continue to improve the lives of underserved communities. I think it was really helpful from my perspective to at least see the different elements that are needed to help facilitate that process. And I'm really excited to see where that project goes and how we can continue to make sure that data don't end up in graveyards. So this concludes the first day of our event. Please remember to log in again tomorrow for an equally riveting discussion on communicating gender statistics. And once again, I want to thank all participants and speakers for joining us today and for your engagement throughout the event. As we said in the chat, we'll be sharing these materials with you in follow-up. And I really do look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow.
Thank you all. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Gloria. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.